Tales from the Odyssey, Part 1, 2, Land of the Dead. From the Tales of the Odyssey, Book 2, Land of the Dead, Chapter 1, Island of the Cannibal Giants. For days, Odysseus, king of the Greek Isles of Ithaca, rode with his warriors over the calm seas. As he rode, Odysseus felt great pity for his men. He knew they grieved for their comrades murdered by the one-eyed giant, the Cyclops. He knew they also felt terrible guilt for their foolish actions that made the wind god angry. And now there was no wind to fill their sails of the 12 Greek ships. Odysseus shared the despair of his men, but he fought his grief with a single vision, the vision of home. Before they had anchored the wind god, the vision of home. Before he had angered the wind god, the Greeks had sailed close to Ithaca. For the first time in 10 years, Odysseus had seen the rocky shores of his island, its green woods and the smoke of its hearth fires. He'd imagined his wife Penelope cooking dinner for his aged parents and his young son Telemachus. Now, with Ithaca and his beloved family ever in mind, Odysseus rode. For 6 days and 6 nights, without the help of a single breeze, he and his men rowed without stopping. On the seventh day, the Greeks came upon a mysterious island. They steered their ships towards the cove surrounded by a steep wall of cliffs, making it a natural harbor. The Greeks sailed into the harbor through a narrow passage. They tied their ships together near the shore. Though the waters were calm and peaceful, Odysseus felt a strange foreboding. He ordered the crew on the ships not to moor their vessels with the others, but to anchor it near the mouth of the cove. When the Greeks had gone ashore, Odysseus climbed a rock to look out over the strange land. He saw the smoke of the fires from the distance. Who lives here? He wondered. He quickly returned to his men and ordered 3 of them to climb over the cliffs and explore the land. "Find out who lives here," he said. "Tell them we wish them no harm." The 3 scouts. They don't have it. Somebody else might have it. Dollar General. And think about them, Dollar General. The 3 scouts set out at once. Odysseus and the others waited on the rocky shore for their return. The men had not been gone long when horrible screams filled the air. 2 of the scouts charged down the side of the mountain, shrieking and waving their arms. They appeared to have gone mad. "What has happened?" Odysseus shouted. In trembling voices the men told their tale. "We met a girl at the spring. She invited us to go with her," one said. "When we entered her house, her mother appeared, a hideous giantess. Tall as a mountain," cried the other. "She sent for her husband, another giant, a cannibal." The men broke down, sobbing. They told us how the cannibal giant had snatched up their friend and eaten him before their very eyes. A roar then shook the harbor like thunder. Odysseus looked up and saw a legion of giants standing at the top of the cliffs. The bloodthirsty cannibals began picking up huge rocks, hurling them down the mountainside. "Board the ships," Odysseus called to his men. "Set sail at once." As the other Greeks scrambled onto their ships, Odysseus and his crew ran toward the mouth of the cove, where Odysseus's black ship was moored. The rest of the fleet was doomed. The giants hurled their rocks down upon the ships docked in the harbor. The rocks smashed the vessels into splinters and crushed many of the sailors to death. As the Greeks screamed in agony, the cannibals raced down to the shore and speared the men as they were catching fish for supper. Watching with rage and horror, Odysseus knew he could only save the men aboard his own ship. He drew his sword and slashed the anchor rope. "Row, row with all your might," he shouted to his men. "Row for your lives." As the screams and cries of their comrades filled the air, Odysseus and his crew frantically rowed away from the cove of the cannibal giants. Chapter 2. A Gift from the Gods. Odysseus and his men rowed until their ship was finally safe on the open seas. As Odysseus stared at the wine-dark waves, he screamed for his dying men. The screams of his dying men still rang in his ears. He realized the curse of the Cyclops was coming true. He remembered the cruel words of his hideous monster. May Odysseus never reach his home alive. May he lose his way, his ships, and all his men. May he find only sorrow and trouble on his journey. Odysseus had nearly lost all his ships now, and he had nearly lost all his men. 11 vessels had been destroyed by the cannibal giants. All but 45 of his warriors had been slain. Stunned by their losses, Odysseus and his crew could not speak. They sailed on in silence, shaken by the memory of the giants spearing the helpless warriors. Finally, the black ship came upon an island covered with thicket and dense woods. The Greeks climbed ashore and collapsed on the rocky beach. For 2 days and nights, Odysseus and his men lay on the hard ground mourning their lost comrades. On the third day, when the rosy dawn crept over the island, Odysseus gathered his strength and stood up. He did not wake his crew, for they had lost all heart. They are too stricken with grief to hunt for food, he thought. Soon they will be too weak to sail, and they will die on this island. Desperate to save his men, Odysseus picked up his sword and spear, then set out in search for game. Odysseus climbed a craggy hill and looked about for signs of life. In the distance he saw smoke rising from the green forest. It curled above the trees and drifted into the sky. Do more giants and monsters live on this shore? Odysseus wondered anxiously. Or might the inhabitants be welcoming and kind? Before Odysseus could answer these questions, he knew he must find food for his men. The god seemed to hear Odysseus' thoughts, for just then, from out of the trees walked a giant stag with towering antlers. Odysseus hurled his spear, killing the stag at once. He then fashioned a rope from willow twigs and tied the legs of the stag together. He hoisted the stag onto his shoulders and carried it back to the Greek camp. Odysseus found his men huddled in a circle, their cloaks wrapped around their heads. Still deep in mourning, they wept bitter tears for their fallen shipmates. They trembled for their own fate as well. Listen, my friends, said Odysseus. You and I shall not go down to the land of the dead for this morning. It is not our day to die. Until the day comes, we must take care of ourselves. Rise, be well, let us feast on this gift from the gods. The men uncovered their heads. They admired the mighty stag Odysseus had slain for them, and slowly they began preparing for the feast. They washed their hands and faces in the sea. After many days of grief and suffering, their hearts began to mend. Chapter 3. The Witch's Spell. All afternoon, Odysseus and his crew feasted on the deer meat and wine. When the sun set and the darkness covered the island, they lay down on the shore and slept peacefully. At dawn, Odysseus roused his men. Friends, I do not know where we are, he said. I know only that we are on an island. Yesterday morning, when I went hunting, I climbed a hill and saw the sea all around us. I know that others live here, for I saw smoke rising from the heart of the forest. Before Odysseus could go on, his men cried out. They feared that more horrors like the Cyclops and the cannibal giants might well await them on this strange shore. Harness your fears, Odysseus commanded. We have no choice but to explore this island. We know not where we are or how to find our way home. We must seek help from strangers. Odysseus' men paid no heed to his words. They only grew more anxious. Before they surrendered completely to their terror, Odysseus came up with a plan. Listen to me, he said. We will form 2 groups. I will be captain of one, and brave Ulysses will be captain of the other. This quickly divided his men. 22 Greeks were placed under his own command, 22 under that of his trusted warrior Eurystheus. Now Eurystheus and I will cast lots to see which of us will go explore the island, said Odysseus. Odysseus and Ulysses cast lots and a helmet. The lot fell upon Ulysses. He had no choice but to lead his men into the heart of the green forest. With great dismay, 22 Greeks lined up behind him. Some wept as they marched away through the shadowy trees, fearing their impending death. The Greeks who stayed behind wept as well. So many of their friends who had stayed had been slain that they readily imagined they might soon lose more. Hour after hour, Odysseus waited for the return of Ulysses and his band of men. He watched the shadows of the forest and listened for their voices. He feared he may have made a great mistake by forcing them to set out on their quest, but he dared not share his fears with the men who had remained behind. As the sun set over the island, Odysseus, finally hearing the trampling feet, Eurylochus burst from the trees. He was alone. His eyes were wide with terror. Odysseus and the others rushed forward to hear the story. Both clapped on the ground, shaking and moaning, unable to speak. Odysseus grabbed him by the shoulders and pulled him to his feet. "Where are the others?" he cried. "Where did you leave them?" Ulysses could not answer. Odysseus shook him again. "Tell us," he demanded. "Are they dead?" "No, not dead. This is worse than dead." He broke down weeping. "Tell us what happened," Odysseus demanded again. In a shaky voice, Odysseus told his tale. "We traveled through the forest until we came to a valley. We saw a gleaming stone wall. We stepped through the gate into a clearing and soon became face to face with huge wolves and mountain lions with long, sharp claws." "You were attacked by these wild creatures?" Odysseus asked. Ulysses shook his head. "They did not attack us," he said. "The wolves licked us and whined like pet dogs. The lions gently pawed us and mewed like house cats. It was strange and unnatural. We should have turned back." Ulysses trembled and covered his face, but Odysseus shook him again. "Go on with your tale," he ordered. "Tell us what happened next." Ulysses continued. "We were frightened to be greeted so strangely by these creatures," he said. "We moved quickly past them into the inner courtyard of the palace. A voice rang out from a window, a woman singing. She had the most beautiful voice I had ever heard." "Who was she?" asked Odysseus. "I do not know," said Ulysses. "When we peered through the window, we saw a radiant being weaving at the loom. She looked like a goddess. She had long braids that shone in the sunlight. Her gown was made of jewels that seemed to change colors as she sang. She wove a cloth made from the most delicate silken threads. I wanted to lead us away at once, for I thought of the terrible dangers we faced on our journey, but I alone seemed worried. The others called out to her as she came to the door and invited them in. I held back, hiding while they rushed forward to enter her home. I could not stop them. They followed her into the house, and she closed the door behind them. Peering secretly through the window, I saw her offer them food and wine. They then turned her. Then she turned her back on them. She mixed a potion of pale honey and wine, and she poured this into their food. I called out a warning to them. I feared she was trying to drug them, but the men seemed not to hear. They swallowed the portion willingly. In an instant they were transformed. They were not where they knew not where they were or how they had gotten there. They could not remember one another's names, or even their own. While they were in this state, the woman tapped each of them with a wand, and suddenly they thus trembled at the memory. He hid his face, and the chill went through Odysseus. The horrible thing the witch had done to his men. Odysseus looked up at Odysseus, caught his breath, and then finished the dreadful tale. "Bristles came out of each of the man's bodies," he said. They began to snort and grunt like pigs. Their heads turned into pigs' heads. The Greeks cried out and drew back in horror. The Atlantis had herded the pig men into the pigsty. Lissa said she threw acorns and butternuts to the ground, and they greedily gobbled them up like swine in a farmyard. For a long moment, Odysseus stared at Eurystheus in silence. Finally, he spoke calmly and decisively. Take me there, he said. Show me the way. Eurylochus cried out in anguish. He threw himself at Odysseus' feet and begged for his life. No, no, never again, he cried. Let us escape this curse of this island now, before the she-monster bewitches us all. Odysseus saw that he could not calm Ulysses' fears, but neither could he abandon his comrades trapped in the pigsty of the beautiful witch. Very well, stay here and rest with the others, he said. In truth, I am the leader of all Greeks of this island. I must save my men. I will find the way alone. Chapter 4. The Messenger of God. Odysseus slung his bronze sword over his shoulder, and his men watched with great distress as he left their camp and headed off to the woods. Odysseus walked through the quiet green forest, through the shadow and light, past the gnarly trees and dense brush, until finally he came to the valley. In the distance rose the gleaming stone walls of the witch's palace. Odysseus halted. For a moment he thought of turning back, but he quickly gathered his strength and moved boldly towards the gate. Suddenly a young man stepped in his path. Odysseus started to reach for his sword, but in an instant he realized it was no ordinary human. The man was radiant. He shone with light so bright that Odysseus was forced to look away. Your courage is admirable, Odysseus, said the stranger, but do you know who your enemy is? Have you heard of Cyrene the Enchantress, the daughter of the sun and sea? Odysseus sighed with despair. He had indeed heard of Circe, the Enchantress. He knew that as a mortal he had no power to escape her charms. Once he entered her palace, he would certainly be put under a spell like the rest. Do not despair, Odysseus, said the stranger. I have come to help you conquer Circe and free your men. Will you trust Hermes? Odysseus looked up. Could this be Hermes, the messenger of the god of Mount Olympus, the son of Zeus, the protector of heroes and travelers? I bring a charm to protect you from the witch's spell, said Hermes. What is it? Breathed Odysseus. A special herb, impossible for humans to unearth, said Hermes. Only the gods can take it from the ground. The god reached into a bag and pulled out a black-rooted herb with a flower as white as milk. The gods call the flower moly, he said. Eat the moly and it will protect you from anything that Ceres gives you to eat or drink. When she taps you with her wand, draw your sword and make her swear an oath not to harm you. Hermes handed the black root herb to Odysseus. Then, without a word, the shining god turned and disappeared back into the green forest. Odysseus stared after Hermes in wonder. Until now, on his journey, Odysseus had only angered the gods, the warrior goddess Athena, the sea god Poseidon, and the wind god Olympus. Were the gods looking upon him with favor again? Odysseus looked down at the magic moly with his hands. He raised the flower to his lips and ate it. Then, with new strength and courage, he walked towards the gleaming walls of the witch's palace. Chapter 5. The Witch's Palace. Odysseus opened the gate that led to Circe's palace. Huge wolves and lions prowled the courtyard. The animals approached him eagerly, sniffing the air and making soft, friendly noises. Odysseus stared at them with horror and pity. He knew that the men were trapped in bodies of wild creatures. Odysseus moved swiftly through the courtyard. At the door of the palace, he called out for Circe. Soon the enchantress appeared. Her long braids gleamed like gold, her jeweled crown shimmering and sparkling. She spoke in a soft, warm voice. Enter, please, she said to Odysseus, and she held open the door. Without a word, Odysseus stepped into the sunlit palace. Ceres invited him to sit down and rest. "Let me make you a drink to refresh you after your long travels," she said. She left the room for a moment. Then she came back with a cup and she handed it to Odysseus. "Here," she said, "drink this." Odysseus put the cup to his lips. As he sipped the brew, Circe tapped him with her wand. "Foolish man," she said, "off to the pigsty with you with the rest of them." Hermes' magic herb protected Odysseus from Ceres' evil spell. He did not turn into a pig, as the witch had expected. Instead, he pulled out his bronze sword and held it to her throat. Ceres shrieked in alarm. "Why does my magic have no effect on you?" she cried. "Who are you? What is your name?" "My name is Odysseus," he told her. "Odysseus," she said, "Hermes once told me that a great warrior named Odysseus would someday visit my palace. If you are indeed this man, put away your sword. You must trust, we must trust one another and become friends." Odysseus glared at her. "How can you speak of one when your evil magic has transformed men into beasts? You must swear an oath that you will do nothing to harm me." Circe bowed her head. In a whisper she swore not to harm Odysseus. When Odysseus put his sword away, she called for her handmaidens. Lovely nymphs of the woods and rivers slipped out from the shadows of the palace. They made a great fire under the huge cauldron of water. Odysseus bathed in the soft, healing waters. Then he dressed in a flowing cloak. The nymphs led him to the great hall of the palace where a feast had been prepared for him. Circe invited Odysseus to sit at her table. She filled their golden goblets with wine. When Odysseus would not eat or drink, he sat in silence, staring at Circe. "Odysseus, why will you not eat my bread or drink my wine?" she asked. "You must not fear me now, for I have given my solemn oath that I will never harm you." Odysseus fixed his eyes upon her. "What sort of captain could enjoy meat and wine when his men are not free?" he asked. "If you want me to be happy at your table, you must undo the spell you have cast over my men." Circe held his gaze for a long time. Then she took a deep breath and rose from the table. With her wand in her hand, she stepped out of the palace and into the courtyard. Odysseus followed her and watched her open the gate to the pigsty. 22 fat pink hogs barreled forward, snorting and grunting. The enchantress rubbed a potion on the head of each animal, then touched them with her wand. All at once, their bristles fell off, and the pigs miraculously turned back into men. The men were younger, taller, and more handsome than ever before. They embraced Odysseus and wept with joy. They asked about their comrades. Even Circe was moved by tears of her captives. "Odysseus, go back to the rest of your crew and bring them to my palace," she said. "I swear that I will treat them well too." Odysseus left the palace, hurried through the green forest until he came to his men waiting on the shore. When he saw their leader alive, they shouted with great relief and threw their arms around him. "With the help of Hermes, the spell of Circe and the enchantress has been broken," said Odysseus. "Your comrades have all been turned back into men. Come with me now to the palace, and you shall be reunited with them." Some of the Greeks drew back in fear. "I assure you," Odysseus told them gently, "Circe has sworn to welcome you into her palace." All the men finally agreed to go with Odysseus. They pulled their ship into the shore and hid all their belongings in a cave. Then they followed Odysseus back through the shadowy green forest until they came to Circe's glimmering palace. Circe welcomed the Greeks into her palace. She bade her handmaidens to draw baths for all the men and anoint them with olive oil. The nymphs gave the tired Greeks woolen cloaks and tunics, then led them to a great feast in the hall. At the feast, Circe urged Odysseus to remain with her in her palace. "You are not the same man you were when you left us so long ago," she said. "Your battles and sorrows have left you weak and weary. Your own family will not know you." Odysseus was indeed feel the great weariness as he thought of the war with Troy and his nightmarish voyage towards home, the monsters and the giants, the cruel deaths of his men. "Stay with me until You have forgotten all your grief and sad memories, said Circe. When you are strong in mind and body, I will help you find your way home. Feeling the burden of his losses, Odysseus surrendered to the wishes of the lovely witch. He promised Circe he would stay with her until he and his men were strong again.